Beneath a Montana dawn, amber light spills across forgotten valleys where wild horses still run free. In the distance, a weathered barn stands sentinel against time's passage, its silver boards holding memories of generations who worked this unyielding land. The morning mist reveals a lone figure on the porch of a ranch house, coffee mug clutched in calloused hands, watching as something moves at the edge of perception, where wilderness meets the fading remnants of frontier dreams. Have you ever noticed how healing often begins in the smallest ways? A sudden laugh breaking years of silence, a trembling hand extended towards something wild and free, the courage to protect what cannot protect itself. Some say the American West was built on taming wildness. But what if our true strength comes not from conquest, but from learning to honor what remains untamed, both in the land around us and within ourselves? What if our most profound healing comes when we stop trying to control what should remain free? Join us for a story of broken hearts finding wholeness in unexpected places, where the boundary between what saves and what is saved dissolves like morning mist against the rising sun. The morning broke reluctantly over Sagebrush Valley, Montana, a hesitant spill of copper and gold across a landscape that had seen too much sorrow to trust the light. The old ranch house stood isolated against the vastness, its weathered clapboards the color of bone windows reflecting the dawn like tired eyes. Inside 12-year-old Lily, Westmore sat motionless at the kitchen table, her small fingers tracing the edge of a photograph she hadn't put down in 8 months. A truck backfired in the distance. Lily didn't flinch. She hadn't spoken since the accident, not a single word since the night her parents' car went off. Turner's Bridge during the worst snowstorm in 40 years. The night she'd become the silent ward of her grandfather, Marshall Westmore, a man who'd spent most of his 70 years avoiding the very thing life had now thrust upon him responsibility for a broken child. Marshall watched his granddaughter from the doorway, coffee mug clutched in hands mapped with calluses and liver spots. He'd tried everything, doctors, therapists, even that hippie art counselor from Billings who'd left a box of unused paints and pristine paper that now gathered dust in Lily's room. Nothing had breached the walls the girl had built around herself. "Got to check the north fence line today," he said, his voice gruff with disuse. "You can come or stay, your choice." Lily slid from her chair without looking up, photograph tucked carefully into her pocket. Her choice, as always, was to follow silently, like a small ghost haunting her only remaining family. The old ranch Jeep complained as Marshall guided it across terrain, more ravine than road. Lily pressed her forehead against the passenger window, eyes fixed on the distant Blacktail Mountains, their peaks still frosted with late spring snow. Marshall had inherited this land, 3,000 acres of stubborn Montana wilderness, from his father who'd claimed it from his father before him. The Westmore Ranch had once been something back when cattle prices made sense, and before Marshall's son had chosen books over bulls, leaving the old man to tend the dwindling herd alone. The fence line had collapsed again, where Rocky Creek cut through the northern boundary. Marshall cursed under his breath, surveying the damage. This part of the property bordered federal land wild country that stretched all the way to Glacier National Park. "Hand me that wire cutter," he said, forgetting momentarily that Lily didn't speak. She reached into the toolbox anyway, fingers finding the right tool with practiced precision. 8 months of silence had made her observant, her movements economical and purposeful. Marshall took the cutters with a nod that was the closest thing to tenderness he knew how to offer. They worked in wordless tandem, the old man and the child repairing the barbed wire under a sky that had opened into relentless blue. It was as they finished that they heard it, a sound like distant thunder, though the sky remained cloudless. Lily raised her head alert as a young deer. "Wild horses," Marshall said, squinting toward the federal land. "Mustang herd that ranges through here sometimes." Lily was already moving, scrambling up the creek bank toward the sound, her sudden animation so startling that Marshall called after her in alarm. By the time he caught up, she had stopped at the ridgeline, her small body absolutely still, except for her hair straw-colored and wild, moving in the Montana wind. Below them, in a natural basin ringed by ancient cottonwoods, a band of Mustangs moved like living shadows. About 20 horses, Marshall estimated, mostly bays and sorrels with a few pintos scattered among them. At their center, a massive black stallion pranced nervously, his head high and nostrils flared, sensing their human presence. BLM's been trying to round them up for years. Marshall said, last wild herd in this part of the state. Lily took a step forward and then another, deaf to her grandfather's warning. Something about these creatures free in a way she could no longer imagine being pulled at her, with irresistible force. The stallion screamed a warning, and the herd began to wheel away toward the shelter of the trees. But at the edge of the retreating band, a flash of creamy gold caught the sunlight. A mare separated slightly from the others, stood with legs splayed protectively around a new foal. So young its coat still had the fuzzy softness of infancy. The foal wobbled on uncertain legs, its oversized ears swiveling toward Lily. With unmistakable curiosity, Lily went absolutely still. For a long, suspended moment, child and foal regarded each other across the distance that separated their worlds. Then the mare nudged her baby, and they vanished after the herd in a ripple of golden movement, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of hoofbeats. When Marshall placed a hesitant hand on Lily's shoulder, he was shocked to feel a tremor running through her small frame. She turned to him, and for the first time since the accident, her eyes held something other than emptiness. Something that looked almost like purpose. The social worker, Miss Abernathy, arrived for her monthly visit the following Tuesday, clipboard, at the ready and pinched expression firmly in place. "How have we been doing, Mr. Westmore?" she asked, casting a critical eye around the kitchen, where dishes from breakfast still soaked in cloudy water. Marshall had never understood why she used the plural, as if she were somehow included in their daily struggle. "We're managing," he said tersely, pulling out a chair for her at the table. "And Lily, any improvement in her communication?" Marshall glanced toward the window, where his granddaughter sat on the porch steps, her attention fixed on the distant horizon. "She's got her ways of letting me know what she needs." Miss Abernathy made a note on her clipboard. "Mr. Westmore, it's been 8 months. The trauma specialists we consulted were quite clear without proper therapeutic intervention. Selective mutism like Lily's can become entrenched, even permanent." Marshall's jaw tightened. "She'll talk when she's ready." "That's not how trauma works," Ms. Abernathy sighed. "There are excellent residential facilities that specialize in cases like hers. Children who need more care than a single elderly relative can." "She's not going to any facility," Marshall cut her off. "She's a Westmore's, stay together." Even at the expense of her recovery, Miss Abernathy's pen hovered over her clipboard. "I have to consider what's in Lily's best interest. If I don't see substantial progress by my next visit, I'll have to recommend temporary placement with a therapeutic foster family." The words fell between them like stones. 1 month. Marshall said, his voice scraping like boot heels on gravel. "Give us 1 more month." After the social worker departed in a cloud of department store perfume, Marshall found Lily still on the porch, her school notebook open beside her. Inside were not class notes. Lily hadn't written a word in school either, but a series of careful drawings. Horses, page after page of horses, rendered with a child's hand, but a startling attention to detail. And there on the most recent page, the golden mare, and her foal standing exactly as they had at the basin. "You've got a good eye," Marshall said, lowering himself to sit beside her with a grunt of effort. "Got your mother's talent." Lily didn't respond, but her fingers moved to touch the drawing of the foal, its spindly legs and alert ears captured in careful pencil strokes. "Want to see them again?" Marshall asked. Her head snapped up, eyes suddenly wide. "I know where they water," he said. "Creek Bend, about 2 miles east of where we saw them. If we're quiet and the wind's right, they might not catch our scent." "Surety." The next morning they left before dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to pale, as Marshall helped Lily into the saddle of his old mare Juniper. He hadn't ridden in years, but when he'd gone to the barn at first light, he'd found Lily already there, brush in hand, methodically grooming the patient horse. They rode in silence through blue-shadowed draws and across meadows where wildflowers were just beginning to push through winter-brown grass. Marshall felt the familiar ache in his joints, the protest of muscles long unused to horseback. But there was something else too, a forgotten sensation of freedom that came with moving through this land mounted, rather than in the confines of the Jeep. The creek bend lay in a protected hollow where cottonwoods grew dense along the water's edge. Marshall helped Lily dismount, then tethered Juniper well back from the water. "We wait," he whispered, settling himself against the trunk of a fallen tree. The sun had climbed halfway up the sky when they finally appeared, first a solitary Pinto scout, then the rest of the band in careful procession. The black stallion brought up the rear, head high and vigilant. Lily sat forward, her body tense with anticipation, searching the group until at last the golden mare appeared, her foal close beside her. In the clear morning light, Marshall could see what he'd missed before. The mare was heavy with another pregnancy, her sides swollen with new life. She must have conceived again almost immediately after giving birth, unusual, but not unheard of. The foal at her side nuzzled and pranced, all gangly movement and curiosity. For nearly an hour they watched the Mustangs drink and graze along the creek bank. The foal wandered from its mother's side, exploring with the reckless confidence of the very young. When it discovered its reflection in a still pool of water, it reared back in comic alarm, then cautiously approached again. Ears pricked forward in fascination. Beside him, Marshall heard something so unexpected that for a moment he couldn't process it. A soft, barely audible sound. Lily was laughing. It was over in an instant, stifled as if she'd surprised even herself, but Marshall had heard it, the first voluntary sound his granddaughter had made since the night she'd become an orphan. That night, for the first time in 8 months, Lily didn't immediately retreat to her room after dinner. She sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open, adding detail to her drawing of the creek scene. Marshall moved carefully around her, afraid that any sudden motion might break this fragile new spell. When she finally closed her notebook and stood, she paused in the doorway, her back to him. The words were so soft he nearly missed them. "Can we go again tomorrow?" Marshall's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. "Yes," he managed, his voice rough. "Yes, we can." But they didn't make it back the next day, or the day after a spring storm rolled down from Canada, dropping 3 inches of unseasonable snow and keeping them housebound. Lily retreated into silence again, but it was different now. An anticipatory quiet rather than the hollow absence that had characterized the previous months. On the third morning, the storm cleared, leaving behind a world crystallized in ice that melted rapidly under a assertive sun. They were preparing to ride out when the phone rang, a rarity in itself. Few people had cause to call the isolated Westmore Ranch. "Marshall, it's Tom Erickson from Triple E." "Ah." The neighboring rancher's voice crackled with static on the poor connection. "Thought you should know BLM's out in force along with some corporation boys. They're setting up for a Mustang gather." Marshall felt his stomach tighten. "Where? East Creek system. They've got a trap set at the bend." The creek bend, their viewing spot. "When?" Marshall demanded. "Happening now. Helicopters already up." Marshall hung up without replying. When he turned, Lily stood in the doorway, her face pale with understanding beyond her years. "We've got to hurry," he said, reaching for his hat. They took the Jeep, this time faster than horses, over the rough terrain. Marshall drove, recklessly bouncing across washes that in wetter seasons would be impassable. As they crested the final ridge, the sound hit them first, the percussive thump of helicopter rotors echoing across the basin. Below them, chaos unfolded. 2 helicopters darted low over the landscape, like massive mechanical insects herding the panicked Mustangs toward a hidden funnel of portable fencing. Men on horseback rode the periphery, preventing escapes. Dust rose in great billowing clouds, obscuring sections of the operation. Marshall pulled the Jeep to a stop and grabbed his binoculars from under the seat. The Mustangs were nearly at the trap entrance now, the black stallion driven to the center of the group rather than his customary rearguard position. Marshall scanned frantically for the golden mare and her foal. Beside him, Lily let out a sound, not quite a word, but a cry of distress. She was pointing toward the far side of the gathering operation, where a splash of gold caught the sunlight. The pregnant mare had separated from the herd, her foal beside her. They were running perpendicular to the main group, the mare clearly struggling with her awkward burden. A helicopter pivoted sharply, descending to cut off their escape. What happened next seemed to unfold in terrible slow motion. The helicopter dropped too low, its rotor wash creating a blinding wall of dust. The mare stumbled, going down hard on her side. The foal skittered to a stop beside her, confused and terrified. Lily was out of the Jeep before Marshall could grab her, running headlong down the steep incline toward the fallen horse. Marshall shouted after her, his heart seizing with terror as she disappeared into the billowing dust and confusion below. By the time Marshall reached the basin floor, men were shouting and engines revving. The helicopter had landed some distance away, its pilot gesturing angrily. Through gaps in the dust, Marshall caught glimpses of chaos, the main herd being driven into metal stock trailers, wranglers on horseback redirecting strays, and somewhere in the middle of it all, his granddaughter. He found her kneeling beside the golden mare. The horse lay motionless, blood darkening the earth beneath her. Whether from the fall or the shock or some combination of factors, it was clear she would not rise again. Beside her, miraculously unharmed, stood her foal, trembling but standing pressed against Lily's side as if the child were its only remaining lifeline in a world suddenly gone hostile. A man in a crisp BLM uniform approached, hand outstretched. "Miss, you need to step away from that foal. This is a federal operation." Lily didn't move, her arms encircling the foal's neck. "This is all Bureau of Land Management authorized." The man continued, his tone softening slightly at the sight of Lily's tear-streaked face. "Sonoma Valley Equestrian Development has permits to gather this herd for their conservation breeding program. That foal will be well cared for." Marshall stepped between them. "What happened here?" "That mare was in foal." He gestured toward the helicopter. "Your pilot flew too low." The official's expression tightened. "Accidents happen in these operations, sir. Now please control your child and step aside." "Her name is Lily," Marshall said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And she hasn't spoken a word since she lost her parents 8 months ago, until she saw these horses." He looked down at his granddaughter, still protectively curled around the orphan foal. "I'm not moving her." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of a sleek black SUV that pulled up alongside the BLM trucks. A woman emerged, expensively dressed, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized sharp cheekbones and assessing eyes. She surveyed the scene quickly, then approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "I'm Catherine Harlow, Director of Acquisitions for Sonoma Valley Equestrian Development," she said, extending a manicured hand that Marshall ignored. Her gaze flickered over Lily and the foal, then back to Marshall. "Is there a problem here?" "Your helicopter killed a pregnant mare," Marshall replied bluntly. Catherine's expression didn't change. "Unfortunate but not unprecedented in these operations. The foal will be transported to our facility with the rest of the herd." "No." The word came not from Marshall, but from Lily, clear and unexpectedly strong. "No, you can't take him." Every head turned toward the child, shock registering on multiple faces. The foal pressed closer to her, its oversized ears flickering nervously. Catherine recovered first. "Young lady, these are wild horses on federal land. They're being legally gathered under permits that my company has spent considerable resources to obtain. That foal is now Sonoma Valley property." Marshall looked at his granddaughter, really looked at her for perhaps the first time since she'd come to live with him. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination he recognized. It was the same expression his son had worn when announcing he was leaving the ranch to pursue an education to build a different life. The same stubborn Westmore will that had claimed this harsh, beautiful country generations ago. "What would it take," Marshall asked slowly, "for us to keep this one foal?" Catherine laughed, a sound without humor. "These aren't strays, Mr. Westmore Marshall. Westmore, Russell." "Mr. Westmore, these Mustangs are part of a specialized breeding program targeting specific genetic traits. Each animal represents a significant investment." "How much money?" Marshall pressed. Catherine studied him, reassessing. "The legal hurdles alone would be prohibitive for most private citizens. But if you're serious, $20,000 might begin the conversation." The sum hung in the air between them, absurd in its magnitude. Marshall hadn't seen that kind of money in years, not since selling off the east parcel to pay for his wife's final medical bills. "I'll get it," he said, the words emerging before he'd fully formed the thought. "Just leave the foal with us for now." Catherine's eyebrows rose fractionally. You have 48 hours, Mr. Westmore. After that, we'll come for what's ours. As the gather operation continued around them, Marshall crouched beside Lily, who hadn't moved from the foal's side. We're taking him home, he said softly, but it's going to be a fight. Lily looked up at him, then at the lifeless form of the golden mare. She saved him, she said, her voice scratchy with disuse. He needs a name. Marshall glanced at the mare's still form, at the dust settling over her golden coat, now dulled in death. Echoed, he suggested, because he'll carry something of her forward. Lily nodded, her hand stroking the foal's quivering neck. Echo, she repeated, he's scared. So were you, Marshall said gently, but you're finding your way back. He helped Lily to her feet, and together they coaxed the trembling foal toward the jeep, leaving behind the noise and dust of the gather and the still form of the mare, who had given her life in a last desperate bid for freedom. The first night with Echo was a study in improvisation. Marshall converted a corner of the barn into a makeshift stall, padding the floor with fresh straw. Lily refused to leave the foal's side, so Marshall brought her blankets and a pillow, setting up a camp bed against the wall. The orphaned Mustang was too young to be alone. Lily insisted, watching with anxious eyes as the foal paced and called for a mother who would never return. He needs milk, Marshall said, surveying their charge in the lantern light. Horse milk ideally, but we'll have to make do. He drove into town that night, returning with formula and bottles from the feed store, along with advice from old Pete Wilson, who'd raised more orphan foals than anyone in the county. Echo refused the first offerings, turning his head away from the unfamiliar rubber nipple. It wasn't until Lily held the bottle, crooning softly in the gentle voice she'd only recently rediscovered, that the foal finally began to suckle. Marshall watched from the barn doorway, something tight and painful unraveling in his chest. He'd failed at so many things, failed to keep his son on the ranch, failed to save his daughter-in-law from the cancer that took her 3 years before the accident, failed to prevent the crash that had left Lily orphaned and silent. But this small miracle of a child coaxing life into a frightened foal felt like a first fragile step toward redemption. The next morning, Marshall made calls first to the bank, where the conversation was predictably disappointing, then to former ranch hands, neighbors, even his estranged brother in Bozeman. By noon, he had secured promises totaling less than $5,000 a quarter of what they needed. We'll figure something out, he told Lily over a lunch she barely touched her attention, fixed on the barn where Echo waited. It was mid-afternoon when the unmarked car pulled up the drive, raising a plume of dust visible from the kitchen window. A man emerged, tall African-American, dressed in a rumpled suit that had seen better days. He approached the house with the cautious step of someone familiar with protective dogs and wary ranchers. Marshall met him on the porch, shotgun casually propped against the railing. Marshall Westmore, the man asked, producing a business card. I'm Marcus Washington, attorney with Native Lands Legal Aid Mine, if we talk. Marshall studied the card, then the man. About a Mustang foal I hear you're keeping, and about Sonoma Valley Equestrian Development. Inside, over coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in Marcus Washington, laid out a proposition that seemed too convenient to be coincidence. I represent a coalition of tribal nations and conservation groups. He explained, we've been monitoring SVED's activities for years. Their so-called conservation breeding program is actually designed to create horses that look wild, but lack the very traits that define Mustangs: their independence, their resilience. How do you know about the foal? Marshall interrupted. Washington smiled grimly. News travels, especially when Catherine Harlow is involved. She's SVED's enforcer, sent in whenever there's a potential threat to their program. He leaned forward. Mr. Westmore, that foal may be important. We believe SVED has been culling, destroying any offspring that display what they call resistance traits, meaning they kill foals that show too much spirit, too much of the true Mustang nature that can't be broken or controlled. They want the look of wild horses without the wildness. Marshall thought of the golden mare, her desperate flight from the helicopters. The BLM just lets this happen. Washington sighed. SVED has political connections and makes generous campaign contributions. They've positioned themselves as conservationists, saving a dying breed. In reality, they're patenting Mustang genetics, turning a public resource into private property. What does this have to do with us? We need evidence, documentation of their culling practices, genetic testing to prove the foals they eliminate share specific markers. If your foal has these markers, he spread his hands. It could be the key to stopping them. And the 20,000, Marshall asked, we can help with that too. Consider it an investment in our case. Before Marshall could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with alarm. Grandpa, she said urgently, Echo's sick. They found the foal lying in the straw, his breathing rapid and shallow. He hadn't taken his morning bottle, Lily admitted, afraid she'd get in trouble for not telling sooner. His eyes were dull, his muzzle hot to the touch. Colic, maybe. Marshall said, running, experienced hands over the foal's distended belly. Or something worse. Washington was already on his phone. I know a veterinarian, he said, specialized in equine medicine. She can be here in an hour. The wait was agonizing. Lily sat with Echo's head in her lap, stroking his neck and murmuring reassurances that seemed to calm them both. Marshall paced, cursing himself for not calling the vet sooner, for not recognizing the symptoms. Dr. Rachel Chen arrived, as promised, her truck pulling up with a spray of gravel. She carried herself with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone used to rural emergencies, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her movements quick and decisive as she examined the foal. Enterotoxemia, she diagnosed, preparing an injection of antibiotics. Common in orphaned foals. Their immune systems are compromised without the mother's milk. She glanced at Marshall. He'll need round-the-clock care for the next 48 hours. Fluids, temperature monitoring, careful feeding. I can stay tonight, show you what to do. I'll do it, Lily said, her voice small but determined. Just show me how. The night unfolded in a blur of activity, temperature readings, careful administration of electrolytes, gentle encouragement to get Echo on his feet at regular intervals to prevent muscle damage. Dr. Chen showed Lily how to check for gut sounds, how to administer oral medications, how to recognize signs of improvement or decline. You're a natural, she told the girl as dawn approached. Echo finally resting more comfortably. Most kids would have panicked. Lily's hand never left the foal's neck. I can't lose him too, she said simply. As morning light filtered through the barn windows, Washington returned accompanied by a woman Marshall recognized immediately. Serena Blackfoot, the tribal chairwoman whose portrait hung in the county courthouse alongside other local dignitaries. Mr. Westmore, she greeted him with a formal nod. Marcus tells me you have quite a situation on your hands. Washington had been busy overnight, making calls and pulling strings. The tribal council, he explained, had agreed to provide the required funds for Echo's purchase. With conditions, the foal would legally belong to the Westmores, but they would allow genetic testing and serve as witnesses in any legal proceedings against Ved. Additionally, the ranch would partner with the tribe's youth program, allowing visits from children learning about Mustang conservation. It's a chance to be part of something bigger, Serena explained. These horses aren't just animals. They're living history, a connection to the land that both our peoples share. Marshall glanced at Lily, still keeping vigil over the recovering foal. It's her decision, he said. She's the one who saved him. When presented with the proposal, Lily's response was immediate and crystal clear. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than Marshall had heard since before the accident. But Echo stays with us forever. Promise. The promise was made, hands solemnly shaken. But Catherine Harlow's 48-hour deadline loomed, and Echo remained too weak to stand for more than a few minutes. Dr. Chen advised against moving him, warning that the stress could prove fatal in his compromised state. Sved won't care, Washington said grimly. If they want that foal, they'll take him sick or not. Marshall stood in the barn doorway watching the sun climb toward noon. Then we need to be ready when they come. The call went out to neighbors, former ranch hands, members of the local riding club. By mid-afternoon, a dozen trucks had parked in the ranch yard. Their owners gathered on the porch and around the barn. Tom Erickson from Triple E brought 3 of his cowboys. Pete Wilson from the feed store closed early, bringing supplies and moral support. Even Sheriff Daniels made an appearance, claiming he was just keeping an eye on things. while pointedly parking his cruiser across the entrance to the barn. Inside, Dr. Chen continued to treat Echo, his condition improving, but still precarious. Lily refused to leave his side even to eat, so Marshall brought sandwiches and juice boxes, sitting with her in comfortable silence, as they had so many times in the past 8 months. But now with purpose rather than pain between them. Your dad would be proud of you, Marshall said finally, the words feeling strange in his mouth. He'd spoken so little of his son since the funeral. He always stood up for what he believed in, even when it was hard. Lily looked up, her expression suddenly vulnerable. Do you think they meant to leave me, Mom and Dad? The question struck Marshall like a physical blow. No, honey, he said, his voice rough. Never that storm. It was just something nobody could control. Like the helicopter, Lily said, stroking Echo's neck. Nobody meant for Echo's mom to die either. Her unexpected wisdom left Marshall speechless. Before he could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the barn window, they could see a convoy of vehicles pulling up the sleek black SUV. Marshall recognized from the gather, followed by 2 BLM trucks and a horse trailer. Catherine Harlow emerged from the SUV, her expression darkening at the sight of the assembled crowd blocking her path to the barn. Marcus Washington moved to meet her, legal documents in hand. Ms. Harlow, he called, before this goes any further, you should know that full payment for the foal has been arranged, and we have documentation of several violations of your BLM permit terms that you might want to address before proceedings become more formal. Catherine's smile was cold. Mr. Washington, always a pleasure to see native lands inserting itself where it doesn't belong. She turned to the BLM official beside her. We have a valid gather permit and ownership claim to all Mustangs from the blacktail herd. Please proceed. The standoff escalated quickly, Catherine producing counter documents, Washington challenging their validity. The BLM official caught uncomfortably in the middle. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, suggesting that perhaps a judge should sort out the competing claims before any animal changed hands. From inside the barn, the confrontation was visible, but not fully audible. Marshall moved to the door, prepared to physically block entry if necessary. Lily remained with Echo, whispering reassurances as the foal shifted nervously, sensing the tension. The argument outside had reached a crescendo when a new vehicle arrived. A battered station wagon from which emerged Miss Abernathy, the social worker, clipboard at the ready. Marshall felt his stomach drop. With everything happening, he'd completely forgotten her scheduled visit. Ms. Abernathy surveyed the scene with wide eyes, the crowd of ranchers, the official vehicles, the heated argument occurring in the yard. She spotted Marshall in the barn doorway and made her way toward him, expression shifting from confusion to concern. Mr. Westmore, she began. What exactly is... She stopped abruptly, peering past him into the barn where Lily sat with Echo. The girl was reading aloud from a book propped on her knees. Charlotte's Web. Marshall realized the story of another orphaned animal, saved by unlikely friendship. Is Lily reading aloud? Ms. Abernathy asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Has been since yesterday. Marshall confirmed. Won't hardly stop talking now. The social worker stepped cautiously into the barn as if afraid sudden movement might break the spell. Lily glanced up, her reading faltering momentarily before she offered a hesitant smile. Hello, Ms. Abernathy, she said. This is Echo. He was sick, but he's getting better. Sure, anyone, son. The profound normality of the greeting words that would have been unremarkable from any other child rendered the social worker temporarily speechless. She looked from Lily to the foal to Marshall, her professional demeanor cracking to reveal genuine emotion beneath. I don't understand, she said finally. What happened? Before Marshall could answer, Catherine Harlow appeared in the doorway, flanked by the BLM official. Sorry to interrupt this touching scene, she said, her tone suggesting she was anything but. We've come for the foal. Ms. Abernathy straightened, automatic protectiveness replacing confusion. And you are Catherine Harlow, Sonoma Valley Equestrian Development. She gestured impatiently toward Echo. That animal is company property. That animal, Miss Abernathy said with surprising steel, appears to be providing crucial therapeutic benefit to my client. As her caseworker, I cannot allow any action that might disrupt her clearly significant progress. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Your authority doesn't supersede federal permits, Miss Abernathy, and perhaps not, but I can assure you that Child Protective Services takes a dim view of traumatizing already vulnerable children. I'm prepared to file an emergency injunction if necessary. The unexpected alliance shifted the balance of power in the crowded barn. Washington stepped forward, legal documents already in hand. We have the payment ready as agreed. He said $20,000 for one foal, considerably more than market value. The agreement was contingent on the animal's condition. Catherine countered, this foal is clearly ill. Thanks to your helicopter stampeding his mother to death, Marshall interjected. Dr. Chen can testify to that effect. The veterinarian nodded confirmation from where she monitored Echo's vital signs. I've documented the foal's condition, including trauma consistent with the events described. Catherine looked from face to face, calculating odds and options. Finally, her gaze settled on Lily, still protectively curved around Echo's head. The foal isn't what you think, she said directly to the child. It's not special, it's defective, carrying genetic markers that make it unsuitable for domestication. It will never be a proper riding horse. It will always be difficult. Lily met her gaze without flinching. Like me, she said simply. Something indefinable flickered across Catherine's composed features, a momentary crack in her professional veneer. She stepped back, straightening her jacket with a sharp tug. Fine, she said briskly. Transfer the payment to the account specified, but understand this isn't over. That foal represents proprietary genetic research. We'll be watching. Oh. The threat lingered in the air as she departed, taking the BLM officials with her. Only when the convoy of vehicles had disappeared down the long driveway did the tension in the barn dissipate, replaced by a cautious sense of victory. Washington shook Marshall's hand. Round one to us, he said quietly. But she's right, it's not over. Miss Abernathy cleared her throat. I think, she said with deliberate understatement, I'm going to need a complete update on recent developments. Wishim. As the gathered supporters celebrated outside, Marshall sat with the social worker in the kitchen, explaining everything that had transpired since they'd spotted the Mustang herd. Ms. Abernathy took notes, her initial skepticism giving way to reluctant admiration. It's unorthodox, she admitted, watching through the window as Lily led a wobbly Echo on his first short walk in the barn aisle, Dr. Chen hovering nearby. But I can't argue with results. She's speaking engaging, showing emotional connection. She closed her notebook decisively. I'm recommending continuation of the current guardianship arrangement with regular therapeutic supervision. Marshall nodded, relief washing through him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Miss Abernathy warned. That woman Harlow, she struck me as the type who doesn't give up easily. Whatever's happening here, it's not resolved. Her assessment proved accurate sooner than any of them anticipated. The following morning's mail brought a legal notice. Sved was filing suit against the Westmore Ranch for unauthorized possession of proprietary biological material, seeking not only Echo's return, but substantial damages. Washington reviewed the documents grimly. They're claiming the foal's genetic material is covered by patents they hold on certain Mustang bloodlines. It's a stretch legally, but they've got the resources to make it stick if we don't fight back hard. How Marshall asked the victory of the previous day suddenly hollow. We need to prove they've been illegally patenting genetics from federally protected horses and that they've been culling foals that don't meet their specifications. Washington tapped the legal notice. This buys us time. Court proceedings will take months. Meanwhile, we gather evidence. That evidence arrived unexpectedly 3 weeks later, when a nervous young woman appeared at the ranch, introducing herself as Jamie Reynolds, a former technician from Sved's breeding facility. She'd been troubled by the company's practices, she explained, but too afraid of legal repercussions to come forward until she'd heard about Echo and the growing case against her former employers. I have documentation, she said, handing Washington a flash drive. Records of foals designated for ecological release. Their euphemism for abandonment. Dates, locations, genetic markers. Echo's dam is in there, along with dozens of others. The flash drive contained damning evidence, spreadsheets tracking generations of Mustangs' genetic tests, identifying what Sved called resistance markers, and clinical notes documenting the company's practice of abandoning foals born with these traits. They take them miles from the facility, Jamie explained, her voice shaking. Leave them in remote locations without their mothers sometimes, with their legs hobbled so they can't follow. They're supposed to die without leaving evidence that can be traced back to the company. The revelation sparked a flurry of legal activity. Washington filed whistleblower complaints with multiple federal agencies. Environmental groups launched investigations. The Tribal Council held emergency meetings to discuss implications for wild herds on reservation land. Through it all, Lily remained focused on Echo, who grew stronger each day. The spindly foal gained weight and confidence, though he retained a wariness around strangers that Dr. Chen attributed both to his traumatic beginning and to the very genetic traits Sved had tried to eliminate, the wildness that was the true heritage of Mustangs. Summer settled over Sagebrush Valley, bringing long golden evenings and the scent of hay being cut in neighboring fields. Marshall expanded Echo's enclosure, adding a small adjoining pasture where the growing colt could run. Lily spent every possible moment with him, reading aloud from books Dr. Chen had recommended on natural horsemanship, developing a training approach that respected rather than subdued Echo's spirited nature. Ms. Abernathy's visits became less formal, evolving into friendly check-ins where she often stayed to watch Lily work with Echo. Even Marshall had to admit the social worker wasn't nearly as irritating as he'd initially found her, especially when she arrived with homemade banana bread or fresh-picked berries from her garden. It was during one such visit in late July that disaster struck. The day had been unusually hot, the kind of searing dryness that made everyone nervous in wildfire country. Marshall had been repairing irrigation lines in the east pasture when he spotted the smoke, a thin, dark plume rising from the direction of the county road. By the time he reached the ranch yard, the smoke had thickened ominously. Fire in Montana summer was every rancher's nightmare, capable of consuming thousands of acres in hours if the wind was wrong. Marshall found Lily already leading Echo from the barn, the colt dancing nervously at the acrid scent in the air. "Get your emergency bag," Marshall told her, the old wildfire drill automatically kicking in. "We might need to evacuate." Sheriff Daniels arrived minutes later, lights flashing. "Fire jumped the county road," he confirmed grimly. "Moving this way fast. Evacuation order for everything east of Bellwater Creek. That includes you, Marshall." "How long do we have on?" "An hour, maybe less, if the wind shifts. Fire crews are setting up at the creek trying to establish a break." Marshall assessed quickly the Jeep couldn't tow a horse trailer, and Echo had never been trailered anyway. The ranch's old stock trailer had flat tires and hadn't moved in years. "We'll ride out," he decided. "Get Lily and the colt across the creek to the Wilson place." As they prepared, Marshall saddling Juniper Lily, gathering essentials in a backpack, Miss Abernathy arrived, having heard the evacuation order on her car radio. "I can take Lily in my car," she offered, coughing in the thickening smoke. Marshall shook his head. "She won't leave Echo, and he can't go in a car. We'll be fine. I know these fire evacuation routes better than my own name." The social worker hesitated, clearly torn between professional responsibility and recognition of Marshall's expertise on his own land. "Be careful," she said finally. "I'll meet you at the evacuation center." They set out as the first ash began to fall like gray snow around them. Marshall on Juniper Lily on foot, leading Echo, who was still too young to ride. The route to the creek crossing would take them across the north pasture and through a stand of cottonwoods that backed up to Bellwater Creek, normally a 30-minute walk. But the fire moved faster than predicted. They'd barely reached the cottonwood grove when the wind shifted, driving smoke and burning embers ahead of the main blaze. Echo reared in panic, nearly pulling the lead rope from Lily's hands. Juniper sidestepped nervously, rolling her eyes at the thickening smoke. "We need to move faster," Marshall shouted above the distant roar of the approaching fire. "Lily, can you ride double with me? We'll lead Echo alongside." Lily shook her head stubbornly. "He'll bolt if I'm not with him. You go ahead, bring back help." Marshall knew she was right. The young Mustang trusted only Lily, especially in crisis. He also knew leaving her alone with the fire approaching wasn't an option. "Stay close," he ordered, dismounting to lead both horses. "Wet your bandana and put it over your nose and mouth." They pushed forward through increasing smoke, the creek tantalizingly close but obscured by ash and embers. Echo grew more frantic with each step, his nostrils flared, wide eyes rolling in terror. Only Lily's constant reassurances kept him from bolting. They were within sight of the creek when they heard it, the distinctive crack of a large tree succumbing to fire. Marshall turned in time to see a burning cottonwood toppling directly toward their path. "Run!" he shouted, dragging Juniper forward. Lily sprinted ahead, Echo matching her pace beside her. They cleared the falling tree by mere feet, but the impact sent burning branches and embers showering around them. One struck Marshall's shoulder, searing through his shirt. Another spooked Juniper, who reared and pulled away, galloping toward the creek. "Keep going." Marshall called to Lily now, separated from him by the burning tree. "Get Echo across the creek." Lily hesitated only a moment before urging Echo forward, disappearing into the smoke ahead. Marshall tried to follow, but found his path blocked by the fallen tree, its branches fully engulfed now. He would have to go around, losing precious minutes. By the time Marshall reached the creek bank, Lily and Echo were nowhere in sight. The water level was low from summer drought, but still sufficient to act as a fire break. He splashed across, calling Lily's name over the increasing roar of the approaching fire. No answer came. The far bank showed signs of passage, hoofprints in the mud, but the trail split 3 ways beyond, and in the smoke and confusion, Marshall couldn't tell which direction they had taken. For 20 agonizing minutes, he searched, fear clawing at his throat. The fire reached the creek behind him, its heat intense even across the water. Fire crews arrived, shouting for any civilians to clear the area immediately. Marshall was about to defy them when he heard it, not Lily's voice, but a sound almost as recognizable now. Echo's distinctive whiny carrying from the direction of the Wilson Ranch. He found them in Pete Wilson's front pasture. Lily sitting in the grass, arms wrapped around Echo's neck, both covered in ash, but unharmed. Juniper grazed nearby, apparently having found her own way to safety. "I knew you'd find us," Lily said as Marshall dismounted and gathered her into a fierce embrace. "Echo called for you. He's never done that before." Over her head, Marshall met the young Mustang's gaze. The colt stood alert, ears pricked forward, ash gray, but somehow dignified in the strange orange light of the fire-reflected sky. For a brief moment, Marshall thought he saw something in those wild eyes, not domestication or tameness, but something more profound. Recognition, acceptance. Trust freely given rather than compelled. The fire was contained at Bellwater Creek, sparing the Wilson Ranch and ultimately the Westmore property. But the landscape was altered, hundreds of acres of rangeland and forest reduced to charred earth and skeletal trees. The sight was both devastating and familiar to anyone who had lived long in wildfire country. The land would recover, as it always did, but it would never be quite the same. As they drove back to the ranch the following morning, Marshall watched Lily in the rearview mirror, her face pressed against the window as she surveyed the transformed terrain. Echo had been left in Pete Wilson's care until they could assess the ranch's condition. "It looks dead," Lily said quietly. "But it's not, is it? Not really." Marshall thought about the cycles of destruction and renewal he'd witnessed over 7 decades in Montana. "No," he agreed. "It's just changed. The roots survive underground. The seeds wait for rain. By spring, you'll see green coming back." Lily considered this. "Like me," she said after a moment. "After Mom and Dad died, I felt all burned up inside, but I wasn't really gone." The simple wisdom of her observation left Marshall momentarily speechless. When he found his voice again, it emerged rough with emotion. "That's right. You were just waiting." "For Echo," Lily concluded. "He helped me remember how to grow again." The ranch had been spared the worst of the fire, though the air still smelled of smoke and ash dusted every surface. They were cleaning the kitchen when Washington's car pulled up outside, followed by Sheriff Daniels in his official vehicle. The men's expressions told Marshall something was wrong. Before they spoke, "Sved's making a move," Washington said without preamble. "They've obtained an emergency court order claiming the fire creates exigent circumstances, requiring Echo's immediate relocation to their facility for safety." "That's ridiculous," Marshall protested. "The ranch is untouched. Echo's perfectly safe at the Wilson place." Sheriff Daniels looked uncomfortable. I don't make the orders. Marshal Judge Harmon signed it this morning. Civic representatives are already at Wilson's preparing to transport the foal. Lily's anguished cry propelled them all into action. They piled into vehicles and raced toward the Wilson ranch, but arrived too late. A Sved horse trailer was pulling away as they drove up Catherine Harlow, supervising the operation from beside her black SUV. You had no right, Lily shouted, leaping from the Jeep before it had fully stopped. Echo belongs with me. Catherine's expression revealed a flicker of genuine regret before her professional mask reasserted itself. The court disagrees, she said, extending the order for Washington's inspection. The fire created an emergency situation, and as the foal's genetic owner, Sved, has priority claim in such circumstances, Washington scanned the document, his expression darkening. This specifies temporary protective custody only, and it's based on the claim that the Westmore Ranch was damaged by fire, which it wasn't. Semantics, Catherine dismissed. The order is valid until proven otherwise, by which time the foal will be secure at our facility. Marshall put a steadying hand on Lily's shoulder, feeling her trembling with rage and grief. This isn't over, he told Catherine. Not by a long shot. Her smile held no warmth. It never is with you people, is it? She turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, the foal will receive excellent care. SVED's facilities are state-of-the-art. His name is Echo, Lily said, her voice breaking. And he doesn't need state-of-the-art. He needs me. As the Sved vehicles disappeared down the road, Lily collapsed against Marshall, sobs shaking her small frame. He held her awkwardly, his own anger and helplessness threatening to overwhelm the careful control he'd maintained for decades. We'll get him back, he promised, meeting Washington's gaze over Lily's head. Whatever it takes, the attorney nodded grimly. I'm filing an emergency counter motion today, but Sved chose their timing well. With the fire dominating local resources and attention, the courts will be backlogged for weeks. Well, then we use that time. Marshall said, a plan already forming in his mind. Jamie's evidence combined with Echo's genetic testing. If Sved is doing what we think, there must be more foals out there. More evidence. Washington considered this a dangerous strategy. Trespassing on Sved property would invalidate any evidence we found. Who said anything about trespassing? Marshall replied, years of boundary disputes giving his words added weight. Sved's facility borders public land on the west side. If we find evidence of abandoned foals on public property, the implication hung in the air between them. Washington's expression shifted from concern to cautious consideration. Legally admissible, he acknowledged, but finding anything would be a long shot. It's the shot we've got, Marshall said, glancing at Lily, who had quieted in his arms, listening intently. And more importantly, it's something we can do while the lawyers fight it out. That night, as Lily finally slept exhausted from grief, Marshall sat on the porch with Washington and Sheriff Daniels, maps spread across the old wooden table. The sheriff, technically off-duty, had brought aerial surveys of the Sved property and surrounding public lands. I shouldn't be doing this, he muttered, tracing boundary lines with a calloused finger. But I've never liked how that outfit operates. Too many unexplained incidents over the years. The plan took shape methodically. Sved's main facility lay in a sheltered valley, but their property extended to several remote areas, ideal for discreetly disposing of unwanted foals. Most were inaccessible, except by Sved private roads, but one section, a rugged plateau area, backed directly onto BLM land with no clear boundary markers. If they're abandoning foals, Washington reasoned that plateau would be ideal. Remote predator habitat, no witnesses. Marshall studied the topography. It's rough country. We'd need horses to access it effectively. And timing is critical. The sheriff added CVAD does their breeding work in cycles. According to Jamie's data, they evaluate foals at about 2 weeks old. Any that show the resistance traits would be culled shortly after, which means, Marshall prompted, which means, Washington concluded, if they're currently processing a new crop of foals, we might have a narrow window to catch them in the act. The surveillance operation began the following week. Marshal Washington and Tom Erickson from Triple Ranch took rotating shifts monitoring the plateau area from legal vantage points on public land. They brought cameras with powerful zoom lenses, GPS devices to document exact locations, and satellite phones to maintain communication in the remote terrain. For 7 days, they observed nothing unusual. Routine security patrols, occasional wildlife, but no sign of Sved's alleged culling operations. Lily, meanwhile, retreated into a quieter version of herself. Not the complete silence of before, but a muted presence going through daily motions while clearly holding her grief close. Abernathy visited regularly, professionally concerned about Lily's regression, but personally supportive of the efforts to recover Echo. She even joined the legal team Washington was assembling, providing child welfare perspectives that strengthened their case. On the 8th day of surveillance, Marshall was about to conclude another fruitless watch when movement caught his eye. A Zved truck moving along a barely visible track toward the plateau. He focused his camera documenting as two men emerged from the vehicle. Between them, they half-carried, half-dragged three small forms that Marshall immediately recognized as Mustang foals, even at this distance. His hands shaking with a combination of rage and vindication, Marshall photographed the entire sequence, the men removing halters from the foals, checking their flanks, where identification markers would be then returning to their vehicle, and driving away, leaving the three young horses alone in predator territory, miles from water. He reported the coordinates to Washington via satellite phone, then did something the attorney had explicitly warned against. He approached the abandoned foals. The young Mustangs were in pitiful condition, dehydrated, their legs bearing marks of restraints, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. All three bore the same type of identification marks that Echo had, alphanumeric tattoos on their flanks, that Marshall carefully photographed along with their location coordinates. He couldn't leave them there to die. Using skills honed through decades of ranch work, Marshall managed to calm and capture all three, though it took hours of patient effort. By nightfall, he had them secured with improvised halters made from his own shirt torn into strips. The journey back to the ranch was slow and difficult, one man leading three frightened foals through rough country, stopping frequently to rest and reassure them. He reached the boundary of his own property well after midnight, exhausted but grimly triumphant. Lily was waiting on the porch, despite the late hour, having refused to sleep until her grandfather returned. Her gasp when she saw the three wobbling foals behind him transformed almost instantly into purposeful action. Within minutes, she had led them to the barn, begun assessing their condition, and started preparing the rehydration formula Dr. Chin had taught her to mix, just like Echo. She murmured, gently stroking a dun-colored filly whose legs trembled with exhaustion. They left them to die too. Marshall nodded, too tired for words, but moved by his granddaughter's immediate compassion. The child, who had been nearly catatonic with grief that morning, was now fully present, focused entirely on saving these new orphans. Washington arrived at dawn, alarmed at first by Marshall's direct intervention, but quickly recognizing its strategic value. The attorney documented everything: the foals' condition, their identification markers, the GPS coordinates where they'd been found. Combined with Marshall's photographs of the abandonment, they now had irrefutable evidence of Sved's practices. "This changes everything," Washington said, watching Lily coax one of the foals to drink from a bottle. "We can file for an injunction against all Sved operations pending investigation, and we can demand Echo's immediate return as potential evidence in a federal case." Dr. Chen arrived soon after having been called by Lily and confirmed what they already suspected. These foals, like Echo, had been selected for elimination due to expressing the same resistance traits, the wildness that Sved was attempting to breed out of their Mustang stock. "It's genetic engineering by culling," the veterinarian explained, checking each foal methodically. "They keep breeding until they get foals without these markers, then eliminate the ones that don't meet their specifications." The evidence was rushed to a sympathetic judge Washington had identified. Within hours, federal marshals were dispatched to the Sved facility with orders to seize all records related to their breeding program and to place the operation under temporary receivership pending investigation. When Marshal, Lilly, and Washington arrived at the facility, they found a scene of controlled chaos, officials cataloging documents, employees being interviewed, and Catherine Harlow engaged in intense conversation with several suited individuals who appeared to be corporate attorneys. "Where's Echo?" Lily demanded, approaching Catherine with fearless determination, The woman turned surprise, registering briefly before her professional composure reasserted itself. Being processed for return to your custody, she said stiffly. The court order was quite explicit. Processed how? Lily pressed, Catherine hesitated. Standard procedures, microchipping registration, final genetic sampling. Stop it. Lily interrupted. All of it. He's not yours to process. Washington stepped forward, court documents in hand. Ms. Harlow, the injunction specifically prohibits any further testing or procedures on animals subject to the dispute. If you've ordered additional genetic sampling of the foal, you're in contempt. For the first time since they'd encountered her, Catherine Harlow appeared genuinely flustered. I'll check on the status immediately, she said, retreating toward the main building. They found Echo in a sterile examination room restrained on a specialized table, while technicians prepared to take blood samples. The young Mustang was sedated but still conscious, his eyes rolling in fear despite the drugs. Lily's cry of outrage echoed through the clinical space. She rushed to Echo's side, ignoring the protests of white-coated staff. The foal recognized her instantly, struggling to rise despite his restraints and sedation. Get these off him, Marshall demanded, already working to release the straps himself. A supervising veterinarian moved to intervene. This animal is CVED property under... Read the injunction. Washington interrupted, thrusting the document forward. This foal is now evidence in a federal investigation to be immediately released to the custody of Lily Westmer. The legal weight of the situation gradually penetrated the clinical environment. Staff stepped back, restraints were removed, and Echo, still wobbly from sedation, pressed his muzzle against Lily's tear-streaked face in unmistakable recognition. I told you I'd find you, she whispered, arms encircling his neck. As they prepared to leave, Catherine Harlow appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. You should know, she said quietly, that SVED's parent company has already begun liquidating assets. This facility will be shut down within 30 days. Good, Marshall replied bluntly. Catherine's perfect composure finally cracked. You have no idea what you've done, she said, an edge of desperation in her voice. This program wasn't just about profit. These horses carry genetic keys to adaptive survival traits that could revolutionize equine medicine, traits that might be lost forever in random breeding. Then study them as they are, Lily said, surprising everyone with her clear, confident voice. You don't have to control everything wild to learn from it. Catherine stared at the child for a long moment, something shifting in her gaze. Perhaps, she said finally, then turned and walked away down the sterile hallway, the sharp click of her heels fading into silence. Autumn painted Sagebrush Valley in russet and gold, the scorched earth from summer's fire already showing signs of resilience as hardy grasses pushed through the ash. On Westmore Ranch, the changes were equally evident. The sagging fence lines repaired the barn roof, patched fresh paint, brightening the weathered house. Most striking was the new paddock complex behind the barn. Where 4 young Mustangs now lived, Echo had grown into his frame no longer. The wobbling orphan, but a handsome yearling, with his mother's golden coat and a distinctive white star on his forehead, that Marshall insisted was exactly the shape of Montana. Beside him, the 3 rescued foals, now named Ember Sage and Drift, had recovered from their ordeal and thrived under Lily's attentive care. The transformation in the child was even more remarkable than that of the horses. Lily spoke freely, now not just to her grandfather, but to a widening circle of people connected to what locals had taken to calling the Mustang case. She had returned to school, though she raced home each afternoon to work with the young horses, implementing techniques Dr. Chen had taught her for respectful training that honored rather than suppressed their wild heritage. The legal aftermath of SVED's collapse continued to unfold. Federal investigations had revealed a complex network of violations: animal cruelty, patent fraud, bribery of officials, falsification of research data. Washington provided regular updates, each more damning than the last. The Tribal Coalition had successfully challenged SVED's patents on Mustang genetics, establishing a legal precedent that would protect wild horse DNA as a public resource for generations to come. Marshall observed these developments with quiet satisfaction, But his greatest joy came from the small daily miracles on his own land. Watching Lily explain Mustang behavior to a group of tribal youth who now visited weekly as part of an educational program. Seeing Echo approach him voluntarily for a proffered apple trust freely given rather than compelled. Finding himself planning for next year's hay crop, next winter's feeding schedule, thinking of a future that a year ago had seemed pointless to contemplate. Ms. Abernathy's visits had become almost entirely social. Her official supervision of Lily's case reduced to quarterly reports that invariably documented exceptional progress. If Marshall noticed that she always wore her hair down now, or that she lingered longer over coffee on the porch, he kept such observations to himself. But he did find reasons to drive into town more frequently, sometimes returning with wildflowers that just happened to be growing along the roadside. On a crisp October morning, Marshall stood at the edge of the north pasture, watching Lily work with Echo in the round pen they'd built together. The yearling moved around her in a fluid dance, responding to subtle shifts in her posture and energy rather than physical cues. It wasn't traditional training, but something more like partnership, a negotiation between two intelligent beings with different but equally valid ways of experiencing the world. "She's got a gift," said Frank Wilson, who had stopped by to deliver mineral blocks for the horses. The elderly rancher, once Marshall's fiercest competitor, had become something of a fixture at the Westmore place, since the fire offering practical help and curmudgeonly wisdom in equal measure. "Gets it from her mother," Marshall replied automatically, then corrected himself. "No, that's not right. It's her own. Something I never saw before." Frank nodded, understanding the deeper acknowledgement in Marshall's words. "Selena, lot of folks coming to the ceremony tomorrow." The ceremony in question was the formal return of the remaining blacktail Mustangs to public land, not their original range, which had been damaged in the fire, but a new protected area established through joint efforts of the tribal coalition conservation groups and sympathetic government officials. The herd, held in temporary BLM facilities since the original gather, would be released on a 20,000-acre preserve, where they could range freely while remaining protected from future gather attempts. Half the county seems like Marshall confirmed. Tribal elders, BLM reformers, news crews. Lily's giving a talk about Echo and the others. Frank raised an eyebrow. "Public speaking now. Long way from the silent child who came here." Alwatiri, Marshall watched as Lily led Echo through a series of movements that resembled a dance more than a training exercise, her laughter carrying across the clear morning air when the yearling added his own improvisational flourishes. "Long way for both of us." He agreed. The gathering at Dawn Meadow Preserve the following day exceeded even Marshall's expectations. Hundreds of people assembled on the wide plateau overlooking the valley where the Mustangs would be released. A temporary stage had been constructed with representatives from various stakeholders seated in rows of folding chairs. Lily sat between Marshall and Miss Abernathy, wearing her best jeans and a new turquoise shirt the social worker had helped her select for the occasion. She clutched index cards covered with her careful handwriting, periodically reviewing them with nervous concentration. The ceremony began with a blessing from tribal elders, followed by speeches from conservation leaders and government officials eager to associate themselves with the now popular cause. Marshall noticed how many of these speeches subtly revised history, transforming reluctant bureaucratic concessions into visionary leadership politics. He thought Riley never changes. When Lily's turn came, she approached the microphone with visible trepidation, but squared shoulders. At 12 years old, she looked small against the backdrop of mountains and sky, but her voice carried clearly across the hushed gathering. "A year ago," she began, "I hadn't spoken in 8 months, not since the night my parents died." She paused, drawing a steadying breath. "People tried to help me, doctors. Therapist, my grandfather, who took me in, even though he'd never planned on raising another child. But I stayed silent because I couldn't find words big enough for what I'd lost." "Well, Mom," the crowd remained absolutely still, collectively holding their breath as this child spoke of grief with uncanny wisdom. "Then I saw the Mustangs." Lily continued, "Wild and free and so alive it made my heart hurt. And when Echo's mother died, trying to protect him, I recognized something in his loss that matched my own. Something broke open inside me and words started coming back. She gestured toward the stock trailers positioned at the meadow's edge, where the Mustangs waited for release. These horses aren't just animals. They're living history, carrying the memory of freedom in their blood. Some people wanted to take that wildness away to make them tame and manageable, and just like every other horse. But what makes them special is exactly what makes them difficult. Their spirit, their refusal to be broken. Marshall felt his throat tighten with emotion he would once have suppressed. Now he let it rise unashamed of the pride that burned in his chest, as his granddaughter continued. Echo taught me that surviving loss doesn't mean forgetting what's gone. It means carrying it forward, letting it become part of who you are. These Mustangs carry the spirit of the open range in their DNA, and now, thanks to everyone here today, they'll keep carrying it forward for future generations. She stepped back from the microphone to unexpected applause that rolled across the meadow like thunder. Marshall saw Miss Abernathy discreetly wiping tears, saw Washington nodding with approval, saw faces throughout the crowd reflecting the impact of a child's simple, profound truth. The formal release began with orchestrated precision. Officials opened the trailer gates sequentially, allowing the Mustangs to emerge at their own pace into the vast new territory. First came the Black Stallion, still magnificent, despite months in holding facilities, his head high, as he surveyed the landscape before him. He trumpeted a call that echoed against distant cliffs, and his band followed mares, yearlings, this season's foals, moving together into freedom. As planned spectacle, it was undeniably moving. But the most powerful moment came afterward, unscripted and unexpected. Marshall had arranged for Echo to witness the release from a safe distance. The yearling stood beside Lily at the edge of the gathering, secured with a lead rope, though he rarely needed restraint these days. As the wild herd moved across the valley floor below, Echo's posture changed head, rising nostrils flaring as he caught their scent on the wind. Then the Black Stallion stopped, turning back toward the assembled humans, as if sensing something of particular interest. His focused, narrowed ears pricked forward toward Echo. After a moment of consideration, he trumpeted again, not a warning, but a different call that carried a distinct query. Echo answered immediately, his neigh higher, but unmistakably responsive. The dialogue continued, stallion and orphaned yearling, calling to each other across the divide of domesticity and wildness, human intervention and natural freedom. He's Echo's sire. Dr. Chen murmured, eyes wide with professional fascination. Has to be. They're recognizing kinship. Marshall wasn't sure if that was scientifically accurate, but the connection between the two horses was undeniable. The stallion remained focused on Echo long after the rest of the herd had moved into the shelter of a distant stand of trees, as if memorizing this lost member before reluctantly turning to follow his band. Lily stroked Echo's neck as he watched his biological family disappear. It's okay, she told him softly. You have both worlds now. There's freedom in your blood and our family in your heart. The gathered crowd gradually dispersed, officials to their waiting vehicles, media to file their stories, spectators to their everyday lives. Eventually, only the core group remained: Marshall, Lily, Miss Abernathy, Washington, Dr. Chen, and a few others who had become part of their extended circle through the long months of struggle. What happens now? Lily asked as they walked back to their vehicles, Echo following placidly behind like an oversized dog. Now, Marshall answered, we build something new. The something new took shape gradually over the following year. The Westmore Ranch evolved from struggling cattle operation to the Westmore Mustang Sanctuary, a facility dedicated to rehabilitation of Mustangs and education about their conservation. With guidance from the Tribal Coalition and funding from groups eager to support their work, they expanded to accommodate more rescued horses and regular visits from school groups. Marshall discovered unexpected aptitude for public speaking, becoming a sought-after voice on ethical treatment of wild horses. Lily developed her own educational programs, specifically designed for children dealing with trauma and loss, using the Mustangs as both metaphor and practical therapy. The four original Mustangs, Echo, Ember, Sage, and Drift, formed the foundation of their program, each demonstrating that wildness could be channeled and respected rather than eliminated. They were joined by others as the sanctuary grew Mustangs from other threatened herds, horses rescued from neglect or abuse. Even a few retired ranch horses donated by neighbors who preferred to see their faithful partners enjoying a dignified retirement rather than an uncertain fate at auction. Echo matured into a striking young stallion golden like his mother, but with the bearing and presence of his sire. He never became fully domesticated in the traditional sense. He allowed only Lily and occasionally Marshall to ride him, and even then seemed to consider it a negotiated arrangement rather than a duty. His bloodline continued through carefully selected pairings with compatible mares, producing foals that carried forward both his exceptional physical attributes and that ineffable quality Sved had tried so hard to eliminate the spark of untamable spirit. On the anniversary of the day they had first spotted the wild herd, Marshall stood on the porch at dawn, watching the eastern sky lighten behind the distant Blacktail Mountains. The land had recovered from the fire, new growth covering the scars with the persistent optimism of nature. Even the burned cottonwoods along Bellwater Creek had sprouted fresh branches from their blackened trunks, refusing the finality of destruction. Marshall heard the creak of floorboards behind him and turned to find Lily in the doorway. Her hair sleek, tousled, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head, coming to stand beside him at the railing. "Dreamed about them, the herd running free." Marshall nodded understanding, though Lily spoke easily now. Their best communications often required few words. "Going to be a fine day," he observed, gesturing toward the clearing sky. "Perfect for the ceremony." Lily agreed. The ceremony in question was the official dedication of the Westmore Mustang Sanctuary, newly designated as a partner facility for the Bureau of Land Management's reformed Mustang Management Program. What had begun as one family's fight to save a single orphan foal had expanded into a model initiative that was reshaping wild horse policy across the American West. Dozens of vehicles began arriving by mid-morning tribal elders, conservation officials, neighboring ranchers, school groups, and media representatives. Marshall had resisted this level of publicity, but Washington and the Tribal Coalition had insisted on the strategic importance of showcasing their success. At the center of the gathering was a newly constructed round pen, where Lily would demonstrate her work with Echo, not traditional horse training, but a collaborative approach that respected his autonomy. While creating genuine partnership, Marshall watched with poorly concealed pride as his granddaughter addressed the assembled crowd, her voice clear and confident as she explained the philosophy behind their program. The silent, grief-stricken child who had arrived at his doorstep 2 years earlier had blossomed into a poised young advocate whose wisdom belied her 14 years. "These horses remind us of something we too often forget," Lily told the attentive audience. "That wildness isn't something to be conquered or eliminated. It's something to be respected, preserved, and sometimes, when we're very lucky, partnered with." She opened the gate of the round pen, and Echo entered at an unhurried trot, head-high golden coat gleaming in the Montana sunshine. The young stallion circled the perimeter, acknowledging the watching humans, with alert interest before approaching Lily at the center. What followed wasn't the standard exhibition of obedience training, but something more profound, a dance of mutual communication. Echo responded to Lily's subtle cues with willing participation, rather than rote compliance, adding his own flourishes and variations that demonstrated not submission, but active engagement. When she finally mounted him, without saddle or bridle, using only a simple rope halter and her own balance, the crowd's murmurs of appreciation intensified. The sight of the slender girl atop the powerful young stallion guiding him with the lightest touch of her hands on his neck created an image that seemed to embody everything the sanctuary stood for: not dominance of wild nature, but respectful partnership with it. As the formal proceedings concluded and guests began to disperse toward the refreshment tables, Marshall found himself approached by a familiar but unexpected figure. Catherine Harlow, considerably less sleek than in their previous encounters, wearing practical ranch clothes rather than corporate attire. "Mr. Westmore," she greeted him, extending a hand that he accepted after only slight hesitation. "Remarkable event. You and your granddaughter have created something truly special here." Marshall studied her, trying to reconcile this seemingly genuine admiration with the ruthless corporate representative he remembered. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said finally. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome," she admitted, "but I wanted to see the results of your work and to deliver something in person." From a leather messenger bag, she withdrew a thick manila envelope. "After Sved's dissolution, I was contracted to organize their research archives. I found these documents relating to Echo's bloodline genetic analyses, lineage charts dating back 5 generations, information that rightfully belongs to you now." Pearlie Marshall accepted the envelope cautiously. Why the personal delivery could have mailed these, Catherine's composure faltered slightly. "I wanted to see for myself after you. After the case exposed what Sved was doing, I had to reevaluate many things I'd believed about our work." She glanced toward the round pen where Lily was answering questions from an enthusiastic school group, Echo still at her side. "I was wrong about the resistance traits. What you've done here proves that." Before Marshall could respond, Miss Abernathy joined them, her hand slipping comfortably into his. A recent development neither of them had formally acknowledged, but both had readily embraced Catherine. She said, her tone professional but lacking its former adversarial edge. "I understand congratulations are in order. The new research foundation sounds promising." Catherine nodded, some of her old confidence returning. "Wild Equine Genetics Institute. Studying Mustang adaptations without interfering with natural selection. Very different approach from SVED." She turned back to Marshall. "We're particularly interested in collaborative research opportunities with facilities like yours, if you'd be open to discussion." Marshall considered the woman before him, once an adversary, now offering something like reconciliation. 2 years ago, he would have dismissed the overture outright. But if Echo had taught him anything, it was the possibility of forming unexpected connections across seemingly unbridgeable divides. "Send a proposal," he said finally. "We'll consider it." As Catherine moved away to speak with Washington about the legal framework for such collaboration, Ms. Abernathy, Elizabeth as Marshall had recently begun calling her in private, gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "Progress," she murmured, "on all fronts." Henham. The gathering continued into the afternoon, flowing from formal ceremony to community celebration. Marshall moved through it with a sense of disbelief that occasionally threatened to overwhelm him. 2 years ago, he had been a bitter, isolated old man, waiting out his remaining days on a failing ranch. Now he stood at the center of a vibrant community, his home transformed into a sanctuary that drew visitors from across the country. More remarkably, he had reconnected with joy in Lily's recovery, in Elizabeth's companionship, in the daily work that had regained purpose and meaning. Even in the quiet moments of dawn, when he sometimes glimpsed the wild herd on the distant preserve, moving like shadows across land that would remain theirs in perpetuity. As evening approached and the crowd thinned, Marshall found Lily sitting on the corral fence, watching Echo and the other sanctuary horses grazing in the pasture. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, softening edges and lending a dreamlike quality to the landscape. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, joining her on the weathered rail. Lily smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes in a way Marshall had once feared he might never see again. "I was thinking about Mom and Dad," she said, "wondering if they can see this somehow, if they'd be proud." Marshall's throat tightened. "They'd be bursting with it," he managed. "Couldn't be anything but—" Lily leaned against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder in a gesture that had become natural between them. "I still miss them every day," she said quietly, "but it doesn't hurt in the same way anymore. It's more like they're part of everything now, like Echo's mom is part of him." Marshall nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Life going forward," he said, changed but not ended. They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them, the horses moving like fluid shadows in the gathering dusk. From the direction of the preserve came a distant sound, the unmistakable call of the black stallion, carrying across miles of sage and grass, echoing against the ancient mountains. After a moment, Echo raised his head from grazing, ears pricked forward in alert attention. He answered with his own clear neigh, no longer the frightened cry of an orphaned foal, but the confident voice of a young stallion secure in his unique place between worlds. Lily smiled at the exchange. "He remembers," she said. Even though he's made a different life here with us, he still remembers who he came from, still carries that with him. As do we all, Marshall replied, his arm tightening around his granddaughter's shoulders as they watched night settle over the land their family had claimed generations ago, land that had claimed them in return through hardship and healing alike. Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue, the ancient light of distant suns reaching across impossible distances to touch this particular moment, this specific place. Marshall thought about the journeys that had brought them here, his own long path from grief and isolation to connection. Lily's brave emergence from traumatic silence, Echo's transformation from abandoned foal to ambassador between wild and domestic worlds. None of them were what they had been before. All had been changed by loss, by struggle, by the unexpected bonds formed in the aftermath of destruction. But from that change had emerged something new and vital, a sanctuary in the truest sense, not just for Mustangs, but for wounded human hearts as well. As darkness enfolded the valley in its velvet embrace, lights winked on in the ranch house, windows casting warm rectangles across the yard, beacons of home and safety in the vast Montana night. Marshall and Lily made their way toward that welcoming glow, their shadows stretching before them, merging with the greater darkness beyond. Behind them, Echo remained at the fence line, his pale form luminous in the gathering night head, raised toward the distant preserve where his wild kin roamed free. For a moment he seemed caught between worlds belonging fully to neither, yet connecting both, a living bridge between what was wild and what was tamed, what was lost and what remained. Then he turned trotting with fluid grace to catch up with his human family, moving easily from one world to the other, as only he could do, carrying forward in his blood and bearing the whispered message of both resilience, renewal, and the enduring power of bonds formed not through dominance, but through recognition of shared vulnerability, and the healing that comes when wounded creatures, human and animal alike, find in each other the courage to begin again. We've walked together through landscapes of loss and redemption, where broken things, people promises, spirits found their way toward wholeness again. From the silent aftermath of tragedy to the quiet triumph of trust rebuilt, this journey reminds us that healing isn't about returning to what was, but finding beauty in what remains and what grows from emptied places. Perhaps what makes us human isn't our ability to tame wildness, but our capacity to recognize ourselves in it, to see our own longing for freedom, our own fear of abandonment, our own courage in the face of forces beyond our control. The wilderness we cherish outside our windows reflects the wilderness we carry within. When was the last time you allowed something truly wild to touch your life? Have you ever found unexpected healing by protecting something vulnerable, something that others deem worthless or beyond saving? Share your reflections in the comments below. Each story of broken trust repaired, of silent suffering, given voice of wild spirits honored rather than broken. These testimonies create a sanctuary for others still finding their way through similar darkness. Your experience matters. Your healing journey speaks to someone who needs to hear exactly these words today.